There's a reason they call me paranoid. I'm paranoid because I know what they did. I know everything they did. Today on the Comic Book Report, the Infinite Crisis Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're taking a look at my favorite DC event of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Infinite Crisis, and today I get to review the Omnibus. But before we jump in, I do want to say a special thanks to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're interested in picking up your comic book collected editions, definitely check them out with the link in my description. You can even use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's Omnibus review. But first, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Geoff Johns, Gail Simone, and a handful of other writers, and illustrated by artists such as Phil Jimenez and Ivan Rice, along with, again, many others. The comics in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2005. The volume itself collects Action Comics issues 826 and 829, along with Adventures of Superman issues 639 and 642, Countdown to Infinite Crisis, Day of Vengeance issues 1 through 6, Day of Vengeance Infinite Crisis Special, JLA issues 115 through 119, Infinite Crisis issues 1 through 7, Infinite Crisis Secret Files, The OMAC Project issues 1 through 6, The OMAC Project Infinite Crisis Special, Rand Thanagar War issues 1 through 6, The Rand Thanagon Infinite Crisis Special, Superman issue 216 and 219, Villains United issues 1 through 6, Villains United Infinite Crisis Special, and Wonder Woman issue 219. This oversized hardcover edition has glossy print paper stock and comes in at 1,424 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Infinite Crisis Omnibus, and right from the jump, I absolutely love the cover we get on this edition. We have the DC Trinity kind of in the ashes after the battle. It's really epic. We get to see all of our favorite heroes just looking really downtrodden here. As far as the spine on this omnibus goes, I think it is a nice, clean design, but I do think it's a little bit lackluster. I think I expected a little bit more of a punch with how intense this series is, but it's still a nice clean look as far as the spine goes. When we get to the back cover, we do have just some more art from the book. I do think it's a nice sampling of what we can expect a bit on the inside. Overall, I think it's a really well-produced dust jacket. I don't have any serious complaints here, but that front cover is just gorgeous. Now let's take one final closer look at the dust jacket. This time we'll also look at the interior flaps of this dust jacket. Again, I think it's a great presentation. I think that we get a good sampling of what this event may or may not entail. Overall, really nice production design. I do like the choices they made for the graphics. An overall good dust jacket. After we finish taking a look at this again one final time, I will go ahead and transition to taking a look at the Under the Dust Jacket artwork for this omnibus, which is also quite beautiful. I really love what we get on the actual hardback itself. We have a nice, I believe, Jim Lee image here on the front cover, again with the DC Trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, this time in more of an action pose. I think that cover was actually the dust jacket cover on a previous edition, if I'm not mistaken. At any rate, I'm happy to see it here. The spine of the hardback is the same as the one found on the dust jacket, and in the back of the book we have Superboy Prime, a really nice little under the dust jacket art print. And now that we've taken a look at the exteriors, I do want to take a moment to examine the binding for this book. There's definitely some glue in my binding. I think it might also be sewn, although it's a little bit hard for me to tell. At any rate, I read this cover to cover without any binding issues whatsoever. I'm pretty encouraged for the longevity of this book, and overall, I have no complaints as far as the binding is concerned. And I always love those oversized glossy print pages. Diving into the collection itself, I will say after kind of the front matter, title pages, things like that, I think there's a little bit of a foreword. There really isn't any kind of table of contents whatsoever, which I was really disappointed to see. I mean, even with some of the other Marvel books and things I've read lately, there's been at least kind of the mapping table of contents where we get kind of the creators for each series kind of listed out in a nice kind of array where you can get like an eye full of just exactly what's included in the book. But it's not really laid out that well here in the beginning of this book. We really just jump right in. And so it's not a huge deal, but I love a proper table of contents in an omnibus. If you can't have page numbers, at least kind of mapping and showing me really clearly what's what. I would have liked to see that, honestly. But at any rate, we really start with a bang with the countdown to Infinite Crisis. We have this kind of mystery that Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, is trying to uncover. He's noticing kind of a weird conspiracy. This leads directly into kind of the OMAC Project miniseries, which has to do with this program that Batman kind of initiated back in the day, presumably, where he created kind of this AI or these sort of machines to kind of help seek out the pros and weaknesses of the Justice League, and kind of had a fail-safe system kind of backup in case things went really awry. We find out that that program and that software or whatever is kind of taken over by Checkmate under the leadership of Maxwell Lord, but we kind of discover that throughout. We find out that this technology kind of has given itself sentience, and after it's had sort of a reprogramming by Maxwell Lord, it's sort of seeking to eliminate all the metahumans in the world. It creates these kind of freaky AI, almost like Terminators, like these liquidy, kind of soft nanobite sort of just creatures, and it's this really interesting kind of dystopian-like robot uprising, but we have it kind of all veiled in mystery initially. Like I said, we have Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle, kind of stumble across this. He tries to escalate the issue to different members of the Justice League. You know, he tries to reach out to Wonder Woman, he tries to reach out to his friend Booster Gold and a couple others, but he's basically dismissed. He's told he's kind of leaning too far into this conspiracy theory, he can't be trusted, you know, so forth. But this all is kind of the inciting incident when he is actually murdered at the orders of Maxwell Lord. We find out the Blue Beetle has died, and the rest of kind of the Justice League and these different characters basically try to figure out what he was involved in and what really happened here. And that really spins out, like I said, into this OMAC project where we have kind of different areas within Checkmate and the DC Universe and the Justice League all trying to fight the uprising of these kind of robotic machines and try to basically stop Maxwell Lord. We also have just some interesting issues that have to do with Superman and Wonder Woman. This all culminates in a final battle with Maxwell Lord, where we actually have, and this is again a little bit of a spoiler, we have Wonder Woman kill Maxwell Lord in battle, much to the just disappointment, chagrin, horror of Superman and Batman in particular. This is kind of Wonder Woman's fall from grace moment, and it's something that we see kind of kicking off a chain of events where sort of the main DC Trinity, again, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, all have kind of fall from grace moments, or areas where they're not the heroes they're meant to be. Between Wonder Woman executing Maxwell Lord, we have Batman, again, just kind of not stepping up in the way he needs to, going it alone, creating these technologies, kind of taking things too far. We have Superman not really holding his own weight and stepping up to bat in a lot of ways here. And we have this feeling that DC's main heroes just kind of aren't cutting it. We are also treated to a lot of other miniseries as well. We have the kind of Villains United, which is this really interesting team book, that the Secret Six. They talk about characters like Catman and Deadshot, Ragdoll. We have a Parademon from Apocalypse, a couple others in this team. It's just a really fascinating book that to me reminded me a little bit of something like the Suicide Squad or the Thunderbolts, where we have this kind of group of sort of anti-heroes coming together, and there's a kind of mercenary aspect about this team. You're not really sure if they're going to go for the side of good or bad, or if it's bad fighting a greater degree of evil. We have them kind of representing this kind of rebel villain faction, trying to basically go against Lex Luthor and Black Adam's kind of big villain society, which is something that's cropping up in the DC universe as we lead into Infinite Crisis. And so it's kind of this team versus Lex Luthor and his kind of A-list villain team. So it's kind of this scrappy, like I said, anti-hero little faction. It's a really interesting miniseries. It was one of my favorites and one of my most unexpected. We have another miniseries that really has to do with the Spectre kind of going mad, kind of going unhinged. He doesn't have a host, and he's being kind of seduced and corrupted, and he's basically believing that the only way to root out all evil and get vengeance is to destroy all the magic and magic users in the DC universe. So it's kind of a DC magic users and kind of the DC dark universe versus the Spectre, and this is a real trip here. You know, we have characters like the Enchantress, Detective Chimp, and a handful of others. It's a really eclectic group that I think was just really fascinating as well. This series also overlapped with Captain Marvel, Shazam, The Rock of Eternity, and again, it's a lot more magic heavy. We had another series that was the Rann-Thanagar War. This was really fun if you're a fan of characters like Adam Strange or Hawkman. I know I've always kind of liked Hawkman, so having this kind of intergalactic space battle miniseries was kind of a blast. It was a really refreshing change of pace from the more earthbound adventures we were having throughout the rest of this omnibus. This Rann-Thanagar War also overlaps with characters like some of the Titans. We have some Green Lanterns showing up, like Kilowog and Kyle Rayner. Really a fun miniseries. It was much more refreshing than I expected it to be. I was a little nervous having kind of a cosmic miniseries in this, but it really worked. And I think what's so fascinating about some of the miniseries we have included in this book is that they all feel very different from one another. In many cases, different creative teams, different artists, and really different tones and feels. Like I said already, of the ones I've already described, we have kind of this gritty, trying to stop this robot apocalypse kind of miniseries. We have one that's more magic fantasy heavy, one that's like intergalactic space sci-fi heavy. We have kind of this, maybe, I'm hesitant to say the word grounded, but much more straight-laced kind of anti-hero story. And with all of these elements combined, along with, some stories with just the traditional Justice League and Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, we've got this really just kind of diverse mix of series that kind of serve as the prelude to Infinite Crisis. I think in this way, it does remind me a lot of Marvel's like Annihilation, where we had all of those different mini-series following characters like Nova and Silver Surfer and Drax the Destroyer, all leading into the Annihilation event itself. This omnibus is mapped in a very similar way. We have some of those issues, we have all of these mini-series, all leading up and culminating with the Infinite Crisis series itself. Interestingly enough, though, once we get to Infinite Crisis toward the back of this book, we do not have issues 1 through 7 of Infinite Crisis right in a row like that. It is broken up a little bit with some of those special issues that are tied into Infinite Crisis. So we'll have a few issues of Infinite Crisis, then we'll have one of the specials that is directly related to one of the mini-series, but it takes place basically during that period of Infinite Crisis. So everything reads really cohesively overall. I think the mapping and the timeline of all the issues makes a lot of sense, and it just kind of works for me. Every so often there is a bit of a chronological overlap as we hop from series to series, but overall how it was mapped is the way that makes the most logical sense, and you feel like you get one sweeping story from beginning to end, which is really impressive because when you start this book, all of the miniseries feel so, just the opposite of interconnected. They feel desperate and different, and the way that Infinite Crisis kind of ties it all together, it really is just this one sweeping epic. And I'm really impressed in the way that all of these different miniseries and the event combined, it just gives you this really kind of impressive breadth and look at the DC universe that I finished this omnibus and I felt like I had such a deeper appreciation for the whole universe of DC Comics, the main like A-list team, but also some of these secondary, tertiary heroes, villain characters, supporting cast. Really just an impressive scope of work here in this single event omnibus. Something I think that Infinite Crisis Omnibus gets right is it really portrays our heroes with a lot more dimension and depth, and it really helps showcase some of the lesser known heroes and villains characters within this universe, and some of the mainstream ones we get to see in kind of a new light. I think that this was a really fascinating move by DC, and it really serves the actual Infinite Crisis story very well, and we know that after this that kind of spins out into the 52 series, that weekly series that we got 1 through 52, kind of going into real-time DC Universe post-Infinite Crisis, where our main 3 heroes are kind of out of commission, and we have the sort of moves of some of these other, like I said, lesser-known characters, or if not lesser-known, surely not as prominent, kind of take more of the spotlight. So I think that this Infinite Crisis Omnibus was a great way to set up everything we'll eventually see in 52, but even just standing alone for itself, like I said, a great way to showcase a lot of these characters. And everything really feels like it's part of one big grand universe. So like I said, when you read all of these kind of separate miniseries, by the time you get to Infinite Crisis and you realize how everything is connected, it really is just kind of mind-blowing and powerful and just deeply affected. As far as my history with Infinite Crisis, I had read this event by itself before, but I had not read any of these tie-ins. So rereading the event in this omnibus with all the tie-ins leading into it, let's just say it was a whole different experience. I think it was so much more full, and it really left a lasting impact on me. For those that maybe don't know about Infinite Crisis itself, it is in many ways a sequel or follow-up to the Crisis on Infinite Earths events, where basically the DC multiverse was kind of rolled into one Earth, one universe, and we have characters kind of consolidated or like removed, and we just have one singular universe that was kind of hoping to kind of clean up the continuity and the rolling timeline of the DC Comics universe. And this book, Infinite Crisis, again, is kind of a response, sequel, or follow-up to that event. I do think it would be helpful to read Crisis on Infinite Earths before picking this book up. However, I do think that this book can serve absolutely as a standalone event omnibus by itself, because especially by the time we get to Infinite Crisis itself, they do go to lengths to basically fill you in on what you would need to know about Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's a pretty good little exposition dump near the beginning of Infinite Crisis number 1, I think, where you kind of get filled in on the Anti-Monitor and what happened to the DC multiverse, and again, all the details you really need to sufficiently feel prepared for this book itself. They hand it to you in this book, so I don't know that you have to read Crisis on Infinite Earths before this book, but I do recommend it because you will get a fuller picture of this event if you read that story first. Going over to the event of Infinite Crisis itself, the central drama of this is that we have all of these different things in the DC Universe all triggering right around the same time. I'm talking about the Rann-Thanagar War, I'm talking about this war with Spectre, I'm talking about everything with the kind of villains, United era stuff with Lex Luthor and Black Adam. All of this stuff is happening simultaneously within the world of DC, the OMAC project, these robots uprising, and everything is just kind of under attack, and we don't know why. Well, in Infinite Crisis, we basically discover that there is this little kind of pocket that the survivors of the Crisis on Infinite Earths are kind of outside of time and space, and they're in this weird little pocket dimension where they can see out at the Earth, and they're just witnessing what has happened. And it's basically Alexander Luthor from, I think, Earth 3, and we have him, we have Superboy Prime, and we have like the original Golden Age Superman and Lois, and basically the Lois Lane is starting to get old, sick, she's dying, and we're led to believe from Alexander Luthor that it's because she needs to be back on her own universe, Earth 2, which was kind of destroyed after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Alexander Luthor is kind of devising a way to get that back. We have Superboy just being very disgruntled, really never getting to be Superman, kind of being robbed of his adolescence and his life. And we have kind of tensions mounting here. We have these heroes from Crisis on Infinite Earths who have kind of weathered the storm and are kind of just at peace in this little pocket dimension, watching the world go by. But they notice that the world that has been created, that's been left, is getting darker. We see kind of homages to things like death of the family, we see Maxwell Lord's execution, we see all these moments that really suggest that, hey, the DC universe is dark. It's not as just fun-loving and good as the universes they come from. In many cases, kind of that golden age era. They feel like, hey, maybe the wrong universe survived. And ultimately, we find that Alexander Luthor is kind of manipulating the whole situation to serve his ultimate goal of creating a perfect world within kind of the existence. And so he manipulates Superboy, makes him feel very disgruntled until Superboy starts banging at the edges of this kind of galactic cage, and he breaks out, and as he's breaking out, he's kind of skewing reality and changing things, and he basically busts a hole in reality and is able to escape. They kind of pull the wool over Golden Age Superman's eyes and kind of just try to distract him with Lois's sickness while they basically plot. And when I say they, I mostly mean Alexander Luthor. He basically impersonates this world's Lex Luthor, and we find out he's the one behind this kind of united villains organization. We have him pulling the strings over at some of the other institutions and some of the other things that are happening throughout all of these other miniseries. And we have Superboy kind of in his own world, but again, he wants to be Superman. He wants to be this world's only Superboy. He wants all the glory. He wants the credit. He wants his life back. And all of this stuff comes to a head. We basically have Alexander Luthor using the Anti-Monitor with some of these characters he's kidnapped from this villains organization, along with Power Girl, who we find out is from one of these other universes. At any rate, we have Alexander Luthor basically trying to turn this machine on that will basically recreate the multiverse, but it's basically splitting this world apart. Everything's going crazy all at once, and the Earth's heroes are kind of stumbling upon this fact, and it's a classic kind of heroes versus villains story from here. We have Superboy kind of going on a rampage. He ends up accidentally murdering some characters, and we have him being thrown into the Speed Force to kind of put a stop to him because he's kind of going unhinged. We have kind of an Earth 2 sort of show back up. We have Superman and Lois extremely excited on their own Earth, only to have Lois pass away, leading Superman to just a deep, deep grief. We have like the main Superman from Earth 1 and this Golden Age Superman getting into an awesome battle, and everything just continues to build. We have just this incredible, suspenseful couple of interactions. We have Superboy eventually emerging from the Speed Force with this kind of crazy armor, and he basically gets in a huge fight with the heroes, ultimately killing Connor Kent, Superboy, in this horrible, gruesome battle. And that leads kind of into the final act of Infinite Crisis and everything that happens. They're basically trying to stop Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor, and it's just, again, a really intense good versus evil story. They're trying to stop the machine. They're trying to stop their world from being destroyed as everything's getting pulled apart by the multiverse, and it's just this epic, breathtaking event that's really hard to describe in a way that does it justice. I always love the work of Geoff Johns. He's definitely the guy that penned Infinite Crisis here, and you can tell he's just firing on all cylinders. It is really a sweeping DC event that leaves me just breathless by the end. There is so much more to talk about, but essentially, good triumphs over evil. Superboy Prime is locked up by the Guardians of Oa, and Alexander Luthor, we find out, is actually murdered by the Joker in kind of a cruel twist. And at the end, we have Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all kind of going on their respective way. Their Justice League time has kind of passed for the moment, and we have them, kind of all three of them, sort of trying to reevaluate and find themselves. I know this leads into kind of the 1 year later kind of era, but before that we obviously have 52, where it kind of shows us what happened when these three characters maybe aren't in that main spotlight. A really terrific ending to this book, absolutely incredible. As far as the art in this book, we're treated to some really gifted artists. And while there are so many different art styles and the different miniseries, events, issues, I do think that there's a level of cohesion in the art styles. I never felt like the art transition was so jarring. It completely knocked me out of the storytelling experience. I think that everyone was very solid, and there was a level of visual continuity that I think was strong enough to carry me from cover to cover in this omnibus. This is definitely a big boy. At over 1,400 pages, this is just an epic. And I do think that all of these miniseries are just such a blast in and of themselves, but to see the way again that they're all tied together into Infinite Crisis is just really spellbinding and super effective. I really think that this is a must read for all DC Comics fans out there. I know for me, even having read Infinite Crisis in the past, to read it within this broader context with all the tie-ins and kind of prelude, it was like reading an entirely different event. I felt like I got so much more out of it. My experience was so much more enriched. I felt like there were so many details that were overall less confusing reading all of these lead-in issues and miniseries before tackling the event itself. I think that this omnibus is probably the definitive Infinite Crisis reading experience, at least for me. I was so happy with my experience reading this, and once I really started to dive into the book, I had a hard time putting it down. I think that this book was also a really fascinating commentary on our DC heroes as well. I think also they really examined the role and nature of heroes and villains and where that line is and what makes a hero, what makes a villain, expectations versus just reality of situations. Just really well done. Like I said earlier, there were so many facets to this book. I feel like I was able to see some of my absolute favorite DC characters in a new and refreshing way, if not flawed. And I feel like some of the lesser known heroes and villains characters I got a greater depth of appreciation for. Like before reading this, I had no idea how cool of a character Catman could be. But wow, I was really floored by that character. Same with Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle. I hadn't really read a ton with him, and his presence in this book was absolutely gripping. I also think that this really was a cool epilogue and commentary on the Identity Crisis series. I think that the implications of what happened in that book are really echoed throughout Infinite Crisis. In fact, I would think that that would be another really good prerequisite read before reading this as well. I think that that would also enrich your time reading this book. But again, an outstanding read. I am just left floored, and even looking at some of the images now during this review, I'm just taken right back to the incredible storytelling experience I had from page 1 all the way through the end. And speaking of end, as we get to the end of the actual storytelling within this book, we are treated to a generous handful of extras rounding out the back of this collection. It's mostly covers and kind of art prints, things like that. We do have a couple sketches, but this is a really fun just addition to the end of this book. I loved getting all the extras. I love seeing all the artwork. I think it just made my experience that much more full. I come to almost expect this with an omnibus. I know something like the Flash by Mark Waid omnibus Volume 1 had like a disappointingly little to no kind of extras at the back, so I'm happy to see it. Even a book of this size, we are still given a generous handful of extras, albeit mostly art, but still really satisfied with that. Yeah, just look at that oversized artwork here we get. It's just really amazing. I think that this book is one I will definitely reference time and time again. I'm sure at some point I'll get around to reading this again. It was definitely just a huge undertaking, but I'm so happy I took the ride. I think, like I said earlier, this is a must-read experience for DC Universe fans out there. So much to get. And I think that that's really going to round out today's omnibus. I'm so happy I got to read it, and I think all that's left now is to give this book a grade. For a truly epically scoped DC comic event omnibus that is filled to the brim with incredible characters, artwork, and more. Frankly, from the Comic Book Report, I'm happy to give the Infinite Crisis Omnibus an A-. This is my favorite DC Comics event, and reading the fuller context of it within this omnibus with all of the tie-ins, I can safely say that is still holding true, if not more so, getting to read all of the books leading into the actual event itself. This is a must-read for all DC fans out there. I think that there is such incredible payoff reading this book cover to cover, but I think even if you just read the Infinite Crisis event itself, you can really have a fun, eye-opening time within the DC universe. But let me know what you think of Infinite Crisis, let me know what your favorite comic book events are, and generally let me know what you think about this video. Thank you for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave a like, and maybe on your way out, try one of my other videos. And until next time, have a good one.